Salam everyone. My name is Noura. I'm calling in from Durham, North Carolina. Welcome to our monthly call. Today's discussion is going to be focusing on the issue of Palestine. So before we discuss, I wanted to introduce the rest of the panelists to you before we kick it off. So Ali John.
Salam everyone, I'm Ali from Orange County.
Halima.
Hey everybody, I'm Halima. I'm from Parsippany, New Jersey.
Medina.
Hi everyone, I'm Medina and I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California.
Omar.
Hi, I'm Omar, calling in from Fremont, California.
And Saba.
Salam, I'm Saba and I'm calling from today San Jose, California.
Great. So it's been a year of really great discussions here at TSN, and to begin our second year, we wanted to take our conversation back to our roots, how the Afghan American diaspora can better understand and support another minority community. This time we'd like to focus on Afghan American participation in the Palestinian movement. So some of the questions we really want to discuss tonight is, what does Afghan American participation look like now? What role can we play in the movement for justice in Palestine? And what are the similarities between the Afghan and Palestinian experience? And to contextualize why now, the Nakba is something that was recently commemorated. And I wanted to turn the conversation over to Ali John to kind of give us a little piece of history of why this matters right now in this moment in time.
Thanks, Noura John. So I'm going to give a really rough and simplified version of history, something that I say never to do in our academic work, but I think is going to be useful to give us some context. So in order to understand kind of the Nakba, you have to understand the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. And this was the time where race theory was being produced, and the idea of the Jew as inferior was taking hold in Europe quite a bit. And as a result, European Jews organized the World Zionist Organization with intellectual thinkers like Theodor Herzl, and there was a call sent out for a homeland for the Jews so that they could be safe from the persecution of Europeans. But the original conversations actually revolved around Argentina, Uganda, and various other places until finally Palestine was settled on. And there was a mass migration of European Jews into the land of Palestine. Now, Jews already existed in the region. The Mizrahi Jews and the Sephardic Jews weren't part of the World Zionist Organization because they didn't have the same experience of anti-Semitism. The mass migration of European Jews with their particular way of life and their ideas about the nation state created a lot of intercommunal tension with the indigenous population, the Palestinians. And this led to strife that was predominantly kind of a new feature of the region. Up until that point, the communities under the Ottoman Empire lived in relative harmony in the millet system. This tension between the various communities in Palestine resulted in acts of violence against one another and ultimately culminated in the UN's attempt to try to divide up the land, and that is the 1947 UN partition plan that divided Palestine into really weird contiguous states. And this resulted in a civil war. In 1948, there was a civil war which led to the expulsion and ethnic cleansing of 700,000 Palestinians, along with another seizure of 60% of the land that was allotted towards Palestinians. This ethnic cleansing is attested by Israeli historians themselves, like Ilan Pappé and Benny Morris, and the ethnic cleansing is remembered by Arabs and the wider Muslim diaspora as the Nakba, the catastrophe. It occurred in May 15th, or in the month of May in 1948, and it's why this topic is so relevant. This is the month in which the Nakba is remembered, and that catastrophe is still being dealt with today by Palestinian refugees and those living in the Palestinian state and Israel.
Thank you so much. That really inspires me to ask, I'm curious to get a sense of the panelists on the call, what how have you been involved on issues around Palestine? And really the broader question is, how does this affect Afghans? But I'm curious to get a sense of folks on the panel and how they've been involved. Tell us a little more. Can I start with Saba?
Sure. So I guess I kind of always had an idea, like a basic understanding of what was going on with the occupation, but it was very, very basic. It wasn't until I came to college that I think I was exposed much more to the social justice scene for Palestine. And so I would say when I came to college, that's when I was exposed to it more, and I began to learn more about it. And then from there, I kind of got much more involved. So I think that's what you're asking, right? Kind of like how and when did we get involved?
Yes, yes. And also, so you were the president of the Students for Justice in Palestine at Ohio State University, is that correct?
Okay, yeah. So, and there was kind of like a path to getting to that, but I did become the president of at Ohio State. We had a committee for justice in Palestine, and so I was the president for 2 years in a row. Not by choice, but yeah. So I got involved in the social justice scene. I think it was more like through just meeting people and getting exposed, right? Like I just had a natural disposition towards humanitarian issues, and Palestine was a natural fit, right? Social justice for Palestine for many reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into later today. But then eventually that passion kind of led me to work with the Committee for Justice in Palestine and just kind of like channel that passion through that avenue. That was one way that I was involved. And I learned a lot, actually. I think I gained so much out of that experience in terms of learning about the cause. It was a little bit intimidating as a non-Arab, non-Palestinian to be running the Committee for Justice in Palestine at Ohio State, especially when we have such a predominant Palestinian presence on campus and just an Arab presence as well. So there was a little bit of a challenge for me, but it was something that I actually really enjoyed because I learned so much from it, and I built so many really lasting relationships that came out of it. And yeah, but it was college. I would say college is where I really, really got exposed and involved.
Thank you. Medina?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, growing up, just being Muslim, our parents would talk about it and we'd kind of know about it. And I would hear my cousins say things about it. So I always felt very sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause. I was never super educated about it. And then in college, same deal as Sabah John, I took a couple classes on Israel. It was a requirement for me to get my Middle Eastern certificate at UCI. So that was when I got really involved. And then upon graduating, I was, just kind of involved on some Facebook pages, but it wasn't until 2014 when, the violence was going on that there was a lot of protests in LA. So when those protests began, that's when I was a little more involved. I became friends with a lot of the organizers, and it was very grassroots. And so I attended all those protests during that summer. And then since then, I pretty much just advocate for Palestine on my blog. Even right now, I want just shameless plug. Well, this is the shirt says Stones versus Drones. This is actually from a Palestinian clothing company called 545. So it's spelled out 5, 4, and then 5 is the number. And they have these really cool shirts. A lot of the money that they generate actually go towards Muslim causes, humanitarian causes. So you guys should check that out. But that is how I basically got involved. It was through attending all of the LA protests, and I think at one point on Wilshire there was 3,000 people on the street, and it was really this amazing thing to see all of that effort. And so since then I've just kind of been involved more on a grassroots level.
Thank you. Halima?
So I would say high school was really when I first started learning about, more in depth about the Palestinian conflict. And of course, you know, in high school, I've always been, you know, a lover of history and things like that, but it was always a very narrow, one-sided point of view. I don't think it was until college that, you know, I was really able to read outside material to really learn about the conflict, take some classes within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and really just getting to know people in the Students for Justice in Palestine group. You know, we had Apartheid Awareness Week at our college, and you know, being Muslim, I feel like there's always a support for the Palestinian cause, just because of the history of it. In college, I used to be the editor of the opinion section, so anytime that the Apartheid Awareness Week would happen, I would definitely highlight it and just be an ally of support for the cause and for all the people on campus who were supporting the cause as well. So I'd say that's when it started, and from there it's just been strong support in any way that I can, and just being a good ally.
Okay, thank you. Ali?
I got involved in high school, and it was I was the president of our Islam club, which is really the name of an early attempt at kind of an MSU or MSA. We just called it Islam Club, and it was the first one of its kind at Aliso Nagel High School, because it was, you know, yuppie suburban white dudes all over the place. And there wasn't that many of us, but that was one of the first things we kind of bonded over, was activism for Palestine. And it also was the time when I started getting interested in Middle East history as a career, right in the late high school era. And so I started reading books, and one of the books I read was a famed Israeli historian named Ilan Pappé. He's part of the New Historians, and he wrote a book on the Middle East, and it's called A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two People. And it was, I think, republished in 2005, and it really got me involved. It opened me up to the conflict that was going on, and it opened up an interest in learning more. And so throughout my college years, I took classes on it. I ended up getting my degree in the Middle East, in Middle East history, and I was involved in activism for Palestine and Afghanistan, as I see these two things are not unrelated to one another, but they're actually deeply connected.
Great, thank you. Omar?
I think similar to Medina, I feel like when you pretty much, you know, everyone listens to Tupac, everyone has an opinion on Palestine, like we all kind of share some of that commonalities. One of the things is like I grew up hearing about it, seeing it around me, hearing people talk about it, but I never really knew much in depth until I went to college. Like many other folks, got involved with like the Committee for Justice in Palestine at my university, attended some some demonstrations, but really, you know, I went to Palestine a couple of years ago for a summer to teach at a high school there. So that's where it really opened up my eyes a lot in terms of what's really going on the ground and how much I didn't know. So that experience was really informative for me. Also, when we came back, along with Saba and some other folks, we organized some stuff with the congressman here in the Bay Area, where we kind of took over his town hall and just was like just really questioning and just really getting on him about what was going on in Gaza at the time. So a couple things here and there that I've tried to be involved in, but really going there was probably the most informative experience for me.
Great, thank you. And Leila John, welcome. If you want to just briefly introduce yourself, like your name, what city you're calling in from, and then again also, you know, how you've been involved in the Palestinian justice movement.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So, I'm calling from Toronto. My first experience in the Palestine movement was on campus as well. In Toronto, there's a university called York University, and it has a very strong Palestinian movement through a student group called Students Against Israeli Apartheid. They explicitly use the word apartheid. They're very brave to be one of the first student groups to refer to it as apartheid Israel. and they've done like such amazing work since I started on campus. I think it was 2008. So my experience was just watching them, observing them. They're like a branch of Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid, and that is like, I think, the head of all the chapters, because we also have Teachers Against Israeli Apartheid here. And so from that experience, I got aware and informed about what was going on.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
The first, really kind of diving into this conversation, how does this matter for Afghans? Is really what I wanted to kick out as the first question. And I wanted to get a couple of you to kind of weigh in. Like, how does this matter for us? Is Palestine a relevant issue for Afghans in diaspora or Afghans in Afghanistan?
Hey.
Layla, do you want to start that off?
Well, I just want to start off as something like really what like connects me to just most social justice issues is that everything is ultimately connected, and that nation might seem like an isolated thing from Afghanistan, but as a human race, we're all very connected. We're sharing literally one planet. So if you see things in a basic way, that eventually it will affect you somehow. On a human level, it makes sense. And also, another quote that initially got me into organizing was from Martin Luther King Jr., and it was something about injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So just on a human level, outside of how is it relevant to Afghans and Afghanistan, is on a human level, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're very connected in this one planet, and that's really my philosophy on it.
Thank you. Ali John, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there to take what Lilo John said and just kind of weave the thread just a bit. I think there are three kind of points I want to make. One, the reason why it matters is because for a lot of us, it's how we connect to the wider Muslim diaspora. It's an issue that is felt throughout the Muslim diaspora. It isn't unique to Palestine or Palestinians. Anyone, as evidenced by just the way we all got introduced into this topic, all of us got through our involvement to the wider Muslim diaspora, whether that was joining an Islam club or an MSU or an MSA. It's the one thing that we all have some form of connection on, and it also is the way which we bond together as a people, right? It's something that we feel, and it reminds me of a very famous Christian proverb in which that the diaspora is one body. When the hand hurts, the head feels it, right? And so we all kind of feel it. But then I kind of want to ask, I want to answer, why is it important? So I teach history of the Middle East, history of Jerusalem, and I tell my students that if there are two things you need to understand in order to understand the wider geopolitics of the Middle East, it's first is Palestine. What happens in Palestine explains colonial structures and how those colonial structures remain to this day. And the second is Afghanistan. The funding of the Mujahideen, the intervention of Russia and the US explains the entire policy of regime change in the wider Middle East. Everything we see today from the Syrian civil war can be explained by understanding these two concepts. But more importantly is why it matters. And that's because the issue and struggle in Palestine is not separate from the issue and struggle in Afghanistan. They're connected in a system of global inequality and injustice that divides the world up into a core and a periphery, into the colonies and the former colonial powers, into the exploited and the exploiter. And as long as that system remains, there won't be radical or real change in the world. We need to dismantle that system. And dismantling it in Palestine means dismantling it in Afghanistan. This is part of a global system that we need to challenge.
Thank you so much. Madina, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, you know, besides everything that, all the amazing information that Ali John just gave us and Laila John was saying, the issue between Afghanistan and Palestine is really similar in the sense of the creation of Pakistan. The creation of Pakistan had a lot to do with Pashtun disunity, Afghan disunity, and the treatment of Pashtuns and Afghans now in Pakistan. So we can learn a lot from it. They're not exactly the same. They're of course not. You know, it's not. Pakistan is not an apartheid state. It's not in the way that Israel is. But I find a lot of similarities, you know, in between Palestinian resistance and Afghan resistance, and I feel like we can learn a lot, you know, even from the way Palestinians are rallying and from the way that they do, you know, Arabs and Palestinians come together for those types of protests. And just like Laila John was saying, it's important because we need to care about these issues. We need to care that, you know, when there was 3,000 people on the streets in LA, I came home and ABC7 said that there was dozens. We need to care that there was huge protests in front of CNN and it was never on the media. I was there on the ground, I saw it. Like, there was so many people that came out. And it's not just Muslims. The media makes it seem like this is such a polarized issue between Jews and Muslims. There was 80-year-old white ladies there in their wheelchairs. So it's important because once you understand Palestine, you understand how messed up the media is and how unrepresented this issue is, and that's really, really alarming. And I think once people have a more open eye and kind of understand this, then they're going to be more sympathetic towards the Afghan cause. They're going to be more sympathetic towards the Muslim cause in general, and even things that don't have to do with Afghans and Muslims. It's learning about Palestine is a very, very big learning lesson for injustice all over the world. And at the same time, you know, it's important to know about it because as Muslims, we need to understand we can't just, you know, go on the streets and protest because the aggressor is a Jew. We need to understand that this can happen in Muslim countries as well, and it is happening in Muslim countries. And I just think that, you know, having more Afghans understand it in an educational aspect rather than I'm going to go to the protests because I don't like Jews, it's beneficial for everyone.
Thank you. Halima?
I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is just how much imperialism and colonialism really affects both situations. You know, the situation in Palestine, the situation in Afghanistan, neither are immune to the amount of outside influence from you know, countries like the United States, from countries like you know, various European Union countries. There's always been a strong correlation to how much imperialism and just the continuous use of excessive force affects the people that are in each of those countries. And I think the parallels there between Palestine and Afghanistan are massive, which means, you know, as Afghans and as Afghan Americans, it's of the utmost importance to support the Palestinian cause, because I think many of us can relate to how much outside influence and outside factors just causes so much grief and stress on the people who live in those countries. So I think the two are very well interconnected.
Saba?
So when we talk about, like, you know, like, I forget what the question was, but it's something about like why is this important to Afghans? And
yeah.
Like, you know, I'm Afghan and I'm also American. So, like, number one, as an Afghan, as a daughter to refugees, I share a very similar narrative to Palestinian refugees, unlike other immigrant communities, right? There's that shared narrative of displacement and forcible removal, and Ali John, he explained that like beautifully, actually. So there's definitely that shared narrative, and I understand and I empathize with the Palestinian struggle. So number one. Number two, as an American, right, I have a responsibility not just to the Palestinian cause, but to anything, right? And so when we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about occupation. We're talking about a system of apartheid, right? And we're talking about U.S.-Israeli relations that are so tight and so strong, and that my tax dollars are continuously funding, right? My tax dollars are funding the occupation. My tax dollars are funding the apartheid wall. My tax dollars are funding targeted incarceration. My tax dollars are funding segregated roads and segregated school systems. So these things are all being, my funds are being used in these ways that I do not approve of and I do not accept. And so, as an Afghan, you know, I have this shared empathy in like the struggles of my Palestinian sisters and brothers, but also as an American, I have a responsibility and a duty, right, to where my money is going. So I don't want my money to go and support an apartheid state and an apartheid regime when there's so many gross human rights violations and violations against UN charters. And I mean, the list can go on, and people are free to go, and if you're not familiar with it, to go and look that information up, because it's just pretty pervasive. But as a human, right, I also have this sense of my dignity is bound, right? I find that it's really important for me as a human being, right? My humanity is bound up in the liberation of my Palestinian sister and brothers, just like my humanity is bound up in the liberation of Afghans in Afghanistan, as Assyrians that are being targeted and massacred in Iraq, you know, and in all these other, there's just so many things. So Palestine is very important to me, and I can see why it would be important to other Afghans and other Afghan Americans and Afghan Canadians as well.
Thank you. So you referenced BDS a little when you were just talking, and so we always hear about BDS and reference the social justice for Palestine. I was wondering if one of the panelists could explain what is the BDS movement and how is BDS effective, and what does Afghan involvement in BDS look like amongst other kinds of activism? Layla, Omar? Do you want the Canadian perspective, or maybe,
go ahead, Layla.
Well, I've been off campus since 2012, so my history in terms of like accuracy isn't that great, but from what I remember is that the Palestinians themselves, like the South Africans themselves, have called out for the international community to support them through BDS, which is Boycott, Divest, and Sanction Apartheid Israel. So it's our way of supporting them externally as outsiders to put pressure so that they can, you know, bring down that apartheid system. But also it's very relative to South Africa, because that in history, in combination of international pressure through BDS is what helped the South Africans end apartheid there. So those two are also really related from success of that. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Omar?
One of the things that for me that I learned in just in being in Palestine is the different types of activism that does occur, and I think that one of the things is you know, BDS has become kind of the thing that we see everywhere now on all the college campuses. Different universities are demanding for the universities to take out the money from companies that invest in Israel. But it's interesting how BDS is part of a much larger movement, and that there are so many different ways of how people are engaging in this particular topic. And so I think for a lot of people, you know, not spending your money and putting your money towards this particular system is, you know, oftentimes a very effective way, like it was in South Africa. But it's interesting to see how many different forms of activism there is, and I'm sure other folks can speak to the art and the poetry and the different, you know, the different forms that exist as well.
Do you feel like being in Palestine, you got a sense of the other kinds of activism?
Yeah, well, being there was it was a shocker for me, because growing a lot of you know, as someone who was Muslim and someone who liked to think I was somewhat engaged in the topic, in Committee for Justice in Palestine, so I was somewhat aware and somewhat familiar. But going there, I didn't realize how brainwashed and how little I knew and how much I thought any sort of resistance was in the form of like mass demonstrations, rock throwing, things like that. Like even with all the information, all the engaged, all the spaces that I was engaging in, I still had that in me. It was still like internalized within me. And then going there and visiting this village, Nabi Saleh, who does weekly, if anyone's seen Five Broken Cameras, there are these small villages that have these weekly demonstrations, and this is a very similar village to that, Nabi Saleh. And you see that like little kids are engaging in this protest. You see that just the different things that people are doing, whether it's like how they walk through a checkpoint. It's not purchasing an item like through using their money, but everyone's engaged in it in some way. So that was really one of the eye-opening things for me.
Excellent, thank you. And so I'd be curious to have you weigh in, Saba, as well. You've traveled to Palestine. What your thoughts were, like beforehand, being involved and being there and seeing what was going on the ground.
Right. So I actually, interestingly enough, I went to Palestine through my university through a program called Living Jerusalem Project, and it was a program designed like at my university in conjunction with Hebrew University in Israel and Al-Quds University in Palestine, where you basically have students from all these different universities engaging in what we're doing right now, video conference calls and dialogue. We would read similar materials and we'd have these discussions and dialogues. And so this was actually when I was really, really getting exposed to what was going on theoretically. And then I was able to, I'm fortunate enough to go meet my counterparts in Jerusalem over the summer. And that's when, I was just kind of like, my world was like flipped upside down. As soon as I arrived, I went through hours and hours of interrogation and just searches, and where my Jewish classmates went through freely, even my Christian classmates went through freely, but me and a couple other Muslim Americans, we were held up. We weren't able to get past the airport for hours, and so that was like the rude awakening. And when we talk about like different resistance that I saw in Palestine. So it's interesting, right? Boycott, divestment, sanction. It's a movement that was called on by Palestinian civil society in 2005, and and it's like Laila John was saying, to basically model what happened in South Africa and starting in the universities with the hopes that once it passes through all these different platforms that it reaches the U.S. government, so the U.S. government can implement it, right? So as an American, right, the American me, I'm pretty privileged. It's pretty easy for me as an American to engage in BDS because I can avoid and resist like purchasing products where I know the funds go to Israel or support the occupation or militarization, right, overseas. And but when you go overseas, like when I was in Jerusalem, it's like, first of all, I realized really quickly there is no Palestinian economy. There is no Palestinian economy. It is one economy. The shekel is the same currency that you use in Tel Aviv that you would use in Ramallah, right? So you're dealing with one currency, you're dealing with one economy, and it's incredibly difficult as a Palestinian to engage in BDS, like while you're over there. So it was a really, really interesting thing for me to witness, that just how difficult it is, because if you go into a grocery store in like Ramallah, you're not going to find very many Palestinian products. It's mostly Israeli products. Your milks, your cheeses, your dairies, your water, your juices, like a lot of these things are going to be Israeli products with like a few Turkish and Egyptian products sprinkled in there in the mix, and like maybe some meat is Palestinian meat. So Palestinians themselves are faced like this really, really difficult challenge in engaging in the BDS movement, number one. And so they do have to use other forms of nonviolent resistance, and so you see that through demonstrations. I was able to join the Women in Black in Jerusalem. It's a group of, actually, you have like Christians and Muslims and Americans in general that join every Friday in the square in Jerusalem, protesting the occupation. And so so you see these different movements and different groups of people. I actually saw a lot of, believe it or not, like Israeli human rights activists who do profound work with Palestinians in refugee camps, right? And they'll go into different refugee camps and offer support. So you see different types and different levels and layers of solidarity work within Palestine, which is like really, really inspiring and gives me a lot of hope. But I mean, there was also like just so much injustice that I had to see, and I also, I mean, to the very limited extent that I experienced personally, going into a refugee camp and just seeing the lives and how it impacted, like the simplest thing, like getting waste removal and trash removal out of a refugee camp was like, the one that I visited was almost impossible. It was like piles and piles and piles of garbage that is unable to leave because there's checkpoints, and the waste removal system, which again is coming from Israel, won't, you know, they're not taking their time to come into the refugee camps to get that out. I mean, just very basic things, or access to water, I could go on, but so yeah, there are different levels of nonviolent resistance as well that people can get involved in. So I'm sure we can talk about it more.
Yeah, I know Medina wanted to weigh in on this too.
Yeah, there's this really cool app for the iPhone, and I'm trying to pull it up right now. It's called Buycott. So if anyone who's watching wants to, you can't really see it.
Oh, we can.
Yeah. So. Yep. Okay, cool. So so if people are watching and they want to get involved, I learned about Buycott through, you know, when I was involved back in 2014. And another one that Saba just said is whoprofits.org. So it's really cool. Like I'll go to the grocery store and I just scan it. I just scan whatever it is, and then it'll let me know if it's, you know, against a certain campaign. And you can just type in like against Israeli apartheid or Palestine, just those keywords, and then it'll pop up. So like I stopped buying Nestle coffee creamer and I buy Bailey's instead. And it's not that difficult. Like there's a lot of other products that, you know, that you can buy, and like how Saba John was saying, it is like a privilege for us, and it is kind of something that's like, oh, okay, cool. I can go to Trader Joe's today and not support Israeli apartheid, right? But then it's super hard for someone else. But it makes you feel better. Like when you're sitting at home and you're like seeing all this death and destruction on the TV, and you feel so immobilized, and you feel like, but there's nothing you can do. There are small ways to protest every day, and you know, and that's one of them. So get Buycott, and it's free for the iPhone.
I wanted to ask a question real quick. Just like it's become almost so easy now to engage in this form of activism, like not buying something or like not participating has become that activism, and it's almost like, has it become too easy for us? We did this. That's always my concern, is like, it's around us so much, this issue for us, especially as Muslim Americans, but are we engaging as deep as we need to be and as we should be, to the level that anything's actually going to change? I mean, we did, like, you know, we organized a bunch of Afghans to go to this, Afghans and other Muslims to go to this town hall meeting, and it was cool, right? Like, we took it over, and you know, every question in that town hall, he had to respond to, and obviously he was deflecting all the questions, this congressman in Fremont. He was deflecting all the questions, not really answering. But after that, it was like, okay, now what? And I felt like we made a point in that moment, but then it never really, I felt like it didn't turn into action. And I worry that it made us feel better and it made us feel good about what we were doing, but I don't know if that really did anything. So I don't know, that's just something I think about, and especially with how easy the BDS movement has become. It's like, and I look now on college campuses, on my college campus, it used to be, you know, a very like a lot of Muslims, a lot of like brown folks, and it's become this very white space now, and that's something that's been really interesting to me, that dynamic, and so these are just some questions that are kind of coming in my head of things that I've been seeing.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that? Ali,
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Could you see me nodding? Is that what it was? Yeah, I gotta tell you, man. I'm digital activism is the other thing. Right? We're all very quick to share things on our Facebook page, and it makes us feel good. It's like, oh, I shared that one thing, pat on the back, and then the rest of the time I'm not paying attention to it. The reality is, activism is hard. right? You're going to go up against, this is the beauty of hegemony, right? It ensures that it always survives. It ensures that it's not easy to overthrow global structures of inequality. It ensures that the current political order cannot be overturned. If it was so easy to do so, we would have revolutions every other day. It's why things like the Occupy movement ends up withering away. And there's a great book on this if anyone's interested. It's by a guy named Wolfson, and he writes Digital Activism, and he says, as you know, the left has failed because we've moved into the digital era, and it's so decentralized, and we feel so good about doing our digital activism that then we never follow up and do anything productive. And it's the same thing. And it's the same thing with the BDS movement, right? The BDS movement is about being the perfect ally, or the best ally we can be to the Palestinians, right? If we're being called upon to do the BDS, that's the type of activism we need to do. We also need to be asking ourselves, how can we engage actively? How do we engage productively so that we generate real change? And that's a far more difficult question to answer. I don't know if I have the answer to it, but my deep frustration is that we all want to speak up in the safe zones, right? We all have an opinion. We're all like, oh, I want to do this and I want to say this, but then when it comes to like actually acting, right, then not so much. And that's something that I think we as a people need to hold ourselves accountable. We hold our friends accountable. We go, look, what is it that we're doing to make real effective change? And it's hard. It's hard because we ourselves come from refugee statuses, right? We ourselves are immigrants in this country, and so we have to often deal with the kind of social structure of just surviving, just finding a way to make ends meet, to create lives for ourselves, that the global is kind of forgotten. And so what we need to start asking ourselves is, how do we bring the global into the local and the local into the global? How do we deal with issues that are on the ground right now, as well as issues that are going on globally, and how do we make that part of our everyday activism? It's not easy, it's not going to be simple, and it's not going to happen overnight, but if we have the will, we can do it.
Thank you. And to the global to local, do you guys have examples from your campuses or communities where you've seen that connection with like Palestine and other initiatives going on in your cities? Like I immediately thought of the Ferguson to Palestine connection that has been made amongst activists in Ferguson to Palestine. And I was curious if other folks had other examples or wanted to share more about what that specific example is. Layla?
I just wanted to say quickly, I think in Canada, a lot of campuses have successfully divested, and also at York University, I don't know if they successfully achieved one of their goals, which was, and I don't even remember the name of the military company, but there's a company that York University has stocks in or something, and it's the ones that make the bulldozers in Israel. Anyway, so it's good to like look into your university and see what companies that they actually have profits gained from or something. And I don't remember the name, but looking at the finances and is a start, I think.
Yeah, and then also, I remember at UC Irvine they had this thing called the Olive Tree Initiative. I don't know if they still have it. Ali John might know. Where they had like a lot of the members were Jewish kids, and then you know, it was not limited to just Muslims or whatever. And they actually went to Palestine and they got to see how the situation was there. And then one of the students who returned ended up, you know, being very involved in trying to get UCI to divest. From what I remember, they did end up divesting. And like Layla John, I don't remember the exact name of the company that UCI divested from, but that was something that, you know, it went from just like plain activism to actually acting, and they were able to make sure that UCI was not supporting Israel any longer. So, and then I think some other schools in California have been able to do the same.
Great. Saba, did you want to return to Omar's original question?
I did, and it ties into what we've been talking about and what we see on campus. So like the question that he asked was, is BDS kind of like too easy, and it's just kind of like, I don't know if he said, I don't know what the words were, but he was basically asking, is that like enough, and is that just a very easy thing to do? And so I'd push back on that, right? Like, yes, it might be easy for me personally to avoid purchasing like a cup of coffee from somewhere, right, where the money is going to Israel. But in terms of like as a movement, although it has been getting passed at many universities, it's also been getting challenged and getting a lot of pushback as well. And there's been a lot of anti-BDS legislation that's been going out, right? Just in the state of California, there is anti-BDS legislation that's on the table right now, basically to cripple any BDS efforts. Any university, any company that is trying to actively participate in a BDS campaign, specifically targeting Israel, it's basically going to lose a lot of funding from the government and other agencies. So that there's like at a government level, there's a lot of pushback from to the BDS movement. But even like on campus, you see scenarios like the Horowitz Center's poster campaign, right? Like there's a campaign, right, that's going around defaming students who are involved with social justice efforts towards Palestine, students that are in SJPs, CJPs, MSAs. They're being labeled in these posters as pro-terrorist supporters or Jew haters and things like that, and it exposes, and so this kind of raises a question of the types of vulnerabilities activists are exposed to when they're involved in social justice efforts towards Palestine, right? They're really putting themselves, their names, their lives on the line, like, and so I would say, like, although it might seem easy as a concept, it's actually, there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of pushback that activists face when they're trying to pursue and push forward BDS. And so the campus climate is like, there's a really negative campus climate surrounding efforts towards Palestine, and it goes along with the political climate we see today and the fear mongering that's out there too. So like, yes, it's easy and conceptually, but it's not that simple as a movement, right? We still have a long ways to go, and it's part and parcel to many movements towards liberation of Palestine. And so I think there's much more we can do. And so one of the other questions you asked was, what more can we do, right? And I think like civic engagement is really important. I think that giving our youth, right, and those who are interested and want to be involved, a language to speak through when it comes to social justice for Palestine is really important, you know. And kind of pushing forward, like when we talk about BDS, it's not just about, hey, don't buy this product. It's also like talking to movie directors, right? Like, for example, Scarlett Johansson is like very much a supporter, and she's like the face of SodaStream. And so it's like, you know, maybe talking to directors and saying, hey, I don't want you to cast her in your movie because she has said really outlandish things against Palestinians and denying their existence. And you know, so it's like, it's kind of like, well, how do you take BDS further, right? It's not just about like not purchasing products. It's like in so many different spheres. And I don't want to ramble, but there was like one point I want to make that I thought was really interesting, is BDS isn't just a movement that we're seeing in the Palestinian context, right? We're seeing it in the United States, in North Carolina, with HB2, the bathroom bill, right? The anti-LGBTQ bill that's up. And you see like entertainers that are now boycotting the state of North Carolina and refusing to perform there. We're seeing like plenty of like sporting events that are being canceled and not being held in North Carolina because of it. And so what was interesting for me to find that in California, where there's an anti-BDS legislation on the table specific to Israel, that California happens to be reaping the benefits of the BDS movement that's happening towards North Carolina, because now the sporting events that were supposed to be held in North Carolina are actually up for bid in California, in Oakland. And so and that was just like a really interesting thing that I wanted to point out.
Thank you. And I know Medina wanted to follow up about some of the consequences. You touched on, Sabajan, about activists face being involved in this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I like this is just one like very microscopic consequence, but it was actually really awkward for me. I had a lot of Jewish friends before I became super involved in Palestinian activism. So I've been called an anti-Semite over over and over again on my blog, in person. I had loads and loads of my friends, defriend me on Facebook and unfollow me and do whatever they wanted to do. So it got to a point where like my parents got concerned, and they were like, be careful when you go to these protests, because you don't want to one day try to apply for a job and then not get a job. And my dad would be like, please don't go in front of any cameras. Like, I don't want to see you on the TV. And so you kind of started to realize, like, wow, like, I had one of my friends her mom owns a pretty like prominent flower shop in the valley, and they do all these bar mitzvahs and all these parties, and they lost so much business because their daughter, a picture of her was published in an anti it was like in this Israeli Facebook page, and they published her picture and started calling her all these names and yada yada, and then like Tina's Flowers lost all this business. So there are like those types of personal consequences of doing this, and there was a lot of awkward conversations that I had, and there was a lot of, when I would see these people in person, it would be weird, and for my friends' parents to lose money out of it, it was weird. So yeah, on a personal level, like there are consequences to having your name out there, and being really vocal about it, but that really just kind of adds more fuel to it, because you realize that like this is really an injustice. Like, if you're not allowed to talk about it, then it's easier to see that this is a problem, and it becomes like more easily exposed, and how quick people are to throw that label anti-Semite. It's really alarming.
Thank you. Halima?
Just to kind of follow up on what Madina John and Sabah John were saying, I think it's really important for everybody who's involved in the cause, and even people who, you want them to understand, is that Zionism is something that needs to be discussed and needs to be differentiated between anti-Semitism. Being anti-Semite is not necessarily the case if you're pro-Palestinian. I think being pro-Palestinian just means that you're pro, a group of people having their land back that was illegally taken by another occupying force. Being anti-Semite is more directed to the Jewish faith and the Jewish person, whereas the State of Israel, while it is and it claims itself to be a Jewish state, they very well do have this Zionist type of outlook, which means, this very strong nationalistic, very strong political movement, which did help in the creation of Israel to begin with. So whenever we're dealing with this type of activism for Palestinians and for Palestine, throwing around that word anti-Semite becomes very difficult to deal with, because especially as a Muslim, you don't want to be labeled as someone who's someone who hates Jews, because that's not the case when you're just talking about Palestine. And I think that goes across the board for everyone. It's not that we hate Jewish people, that's not the case at all. It's that Palestine is being occupied by an illegal occupation and illegal settlements by another occupier. So, that's something to definitely have people be aware of in that difference.
Yeah, and exactly to that point, I wondered if, Ali, you could share some context. Like, how do we distinguish like Judaism from Zionism? People conflate the two, and then that's where the anti-Semitic remarks thrown at individuals come in. Can you clarify that a little more for us too?
Yeah, just a fun fact with Ali, we'll call it. But the early Zionist ideologues, including Herzl himself, actually absorbed a lot of anti-Semitic ideas into Zionism. So the idea was that Jews were provincial, that they were never part of the societies that they lived in, they were parasitic, and they were parochial, they needed to modernize and become part of a new nation. And so the early Zionism actually absorbed that. They wanted to reconstruct what it meant to be Jewish, and they tied it into the nation state, the modern Jew, right? But over time, there has been a new kind of definition of anti-Semitism that's being deliberately pushed by those in power, and that is to define anti-Semitism as anything that is anti-Zionist. And we see this, for example, in my own case. I teach and study at the UC system, and the UC system will try to adopt a definition in order to address intolerance. They actually almost codified intolerance by stating that any form of anti-Zionism would be hate speech. And Judith Butler and these famous kind of academics stood up and said, yeah, that's not going to fly, dude. And so they had to redefine it, and they said, well, any form of anti-Semitic anti-Zionism will not be tolerated on campus. And so the problem is that the reason it's being conflated is, one, it's deliberately conflated from a Zionist perspective. They conflate Jewishness with the Zionist ideology, and that's deliberately done so that anti-Semitism can be redefined. It also happens on the other side. We need to be careful that anti-Zionist, which is a stance against a political philosophy, in the same way that I may be anti-neoconservatism, is not conflated with an ethnic group, with a religious group, or a minority group. That needs to be very clear. And I think sometimes our activism doesn't do a good enough job differentiating that too. So we need to be explicit in that regards. But we also need to recognize that the conflation happens on the other side of the aisle as well, that it's deliberately done so as a means of silencing critique. By recognizing that, we can then form more activism to challenge the definition of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, arguing that no, it's not, and that some of the biggest supporters of anti-Zionism are Jewish people themselves, whether they be for Jewish Voices for Peace. Judith Butler herself is a Jewish woman who stood up, a famous feminist historian or a feminist thinker who stood up against that definition. So we need to be clear in that distinction and don't allow the powers to be to conflate the two.
Thank you. So how does that, I wonder, what does that mean on campus? Like what are actionable items we can, what is it that we can do? So as we're wrapping up this conversation now in terms of how do we make sure that conflation doesn't happen on campuses, and what are other steps that we need to make to sort of help push these movements forward? And then I have a follow-up to that, but I wanted to throw that out there as a question. Layla, you mentioned, and I was curious, Layla, how you had mentioned, and maybe this is a good time to bring this in, that in Afghanistan there's an Al-Quds Day. So this isn't directly related to Ali John's point, but I'm also curious about coalition building of Afghans with Palestine. We've been talking about Afghan Americans, but what's going on in Afghanistan itself? This might be something also worth mentioning.
Yeah, so basically every year it happens. I totally forgot the exact date, but it started from the Iranian government, and now it happens annually. And I always see pictures, and we post it on the Facebook page for Afghans United for Justice. So I always see it, and there's like a huge rally, a lot of support, because Jerusalem at one point in time was a place of peace for all people of different religious beliefs. So it should be for everybody. So it's kind of like very much important to the Afghan people that it remains a place for everybody of all faith. So yeah, I think it's very strong in Afghanistan. It's very relevant to them. It happens every year, and I'm always seeing the rallies, and there's probably going to be more and more participation, the more safer hopefully it gets. Oh, and about the censorship and also the targeting of, activists, that happens to even well-known Jewish professors. Like, I think at one point they tried to bar Noam Chomsky from visiting apartheid Israel. So if somebody like him with so much respect and reputation and privilege can be criminalized and demonized, nobody's safe. Even using the word apartheid here in Toronto is not safe, because the conservatives continue to try to criminalize the use of the word, and they try to associate it with anti-Semitism, and they went so far as the Toronto School Board, the Toronto District School Board here, the high school students are actually not allowed to participate in the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid's chapter of creating a high schools against Israeli apartheid. They actually, you're not allowed to use the term apartheid or do BDS stuff in Toronto school boards. It's Toronto schools. So it's even just using that term itself is risky for teachers and students in Toronto. But some do use it as long as you do it in a very, I don't know how they do it, but I've heard some teachers still try to create a balanced narrative about it, but you can't even use the word apartheid without being at risk and being censored and having the Zionist lobby come at you and try to criminalize you, because they do that to even professors who are Jewish. They did that to one of my professors, David F. Noble. He's passed away now, but he actually sued York University for criminalizing him and calling him an anti-Semite, even though he himself is Jewish. So I feel like anybody who gets involved should be very aware of the lobby and just regular Zionists who will try to come at you virtually, personally. And I think this might be off topic, but mental health is so important with just this issue and every issue as an Afghan, because this stuff is very real. And the more you get involved, the more public you become, and the more enemies you do create. So it's very real, and it's yeah. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mark. Have we lost Omar? Saba, did you want to start, and then we can go into Omar? Are you on mute, Saba?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, what was the question that you wanted to ask? Did you ask it already?
We were returning to the point about I know Omar wanted to mention something about activism, but sort of now that we're wrapping up this conversation, for me, really what's next is two things. One, when we focus on Palestine, as you all do in your activism work, does that make Palestine more important than Afghanistan? Is there an either or is it a both and? Is there too much emphasis on Palestine, not enough on Afghanistan, or how can we do both? That's one question I had. And then also the second question, how do we bring the conversation of Palestine into the Afghan diaspora with our parents and other Afghans?
Okay. So to go to look at your first question in terms of I don't think it's just unique to Afghans, by the way. So one of the frustrations I hear a lot, and I say this in this closed space of speaking to Afghans by Afghans, right? So one of the frustrations that I've experienced, right, as an activist for Palestine, and I know other non-Arabs and non-Palestinians have also experienced this as well, is that it's very easy to rally Muslim Americans, right, around the cause of Palestine. It's very, very easy. It's very natural, and this is for many reasons. There's many reasons behind it, but as an Afghan, number one, and most of us got exposed to it in college, right? There's a reason that I got involved with it as an Afghan, and I know this is true for many universities, is there wasn't necessarily a United Afghan Club years ago, or there wasn't an Afghan Student Association years ago. And so the lens by which we, our identity is really tied, right, to trying to connect with this greater Muslim American community. And so our exposure to Palestine came through this religious Muslim lens, or through an SJP lens. And so you see this automatic outright support for Palestine, and I hate to say it like this, but sometimes it can have this sense of being trendy, it's a trendy, cool thing to be a social activist for Palestine, versus being an activist for social justice issues that Afghans in Afghanistan are facing. Or even, I was talking to a friend, she was doing an event for the Assyrian community in Iraq, and people who would show up to support the cause of Palestine, people who show up at the protests, at the events for Palestinian issues, would not be showing up to issues for Afghanistan, would not be showing up to issues or IDOC would not be showing up for issues involving LGBTQ community. Like, that was a frustration that was constantly expressed to me as, like, in my capacity, in my leadership role in CJP. Like, I would show up, right, on behalf of CJP, but my members wouldn't always show up. And so it's frustrating. It's a reality. There's a reason behind this. And it's not to dissuade people from being involved in social justice issues for Palestine. I think, like, in even having this conversation and talking about it, I think if you care about it from a humanitarian perspective, that it won't matter, right? That there is this phenomenon that does exist. It's very pervasive in the greater Muslim American community. However, I do think that we can use it to our advantage, right? And we can use it for coalition building, for other issues. And so one thing that I was always able to do through my involvement for solidarity efforts for Palestine was that I built allies, right? I made allies, I made connections, and I met people, and I would talk to them about issues about Afghanistan. I would talk to them about other issues that I was passionate about. And so, like, these people would automatically, like, they'd be more interested. They would be more informed on these other issues outside of Palestine, and they would talk about it in their own circles. And when I would have, and so some people would show up to things if I was doing, because I did stuff for Afghanistan on campus and outside of a campus setting, and I did stuff for other events, and people would show up out of respect, and out of just out of, like, understanding and empathizing, right, and learning about something new. So I think base building is really, really important, and a way that we can move, that we can kind of remove ourselves from this idea of, like, well, people only care about Palestine, they don't care about Afghanistan. Well, I think the people who do care about Palestine as a humanitarian are going to care about all these other humanitarian issues, and we have to build those allies through just kind of being involved. So that was something I wanted to put out there.
Mark?
Yeah, I think kind of related to that. If you're, like, I think we've talked about this before, but, like, it's almost, like, easy to be like as a Muslim, like, you grow up, like, learning about Palestine. There's this, white oppressor on brown folks, right? So, like, very sexy topic. It's very easy to just jump at and to be down for and be with. But if that's not translating into action towards other communities and things that we brought up, like colonialism, imperialism, like all those things, if we don't really understand what those things mean and what they are, like, then I don't know how useful or beneficial our activism is. And I think the way we're going to see how effective we are is when, like, Saba was saying, like, when we're showing up for other communities. And I think that's when we truly have a better understanding of where we're at when we're showing up for other folks, because that's, it's almost like it's become, it's like the easy thing to do in some ways. So that's always my concern is that translating into other forms of activism.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like just how Omar John and Sabah John were saying, showing up to other communities is so important. Like, something that I noticed when I would go to these Palestinian protests is, like, a lot of Afghans would show up, but then, like, Afghans don't go to other protests. It's easy to go for Palestine because they're Muslim and because, like, we feel so sympathetic towards them. And then, myself and a couple other people tried to organize a protest against Pakistan, and Afghans didn't show up, and it was like, okay, like that was a little weird. And I thought maybe it's because it's not trendy to do that. And like, even with the issue, I live in LA, and there's a lot of Armenians in Los Angeles, and they have such a strong community, and they go down to the Turkish consulate and protest, and Afghans are so uneducated about the Armenian genocide, and this is something that's so relevant to us too, and I feel like people don't want to be educated on it because Turks are Muslim. So if you're going to be a social activist, don't do it when the oppressor is someone who's a non-Muslim. It really discredits the entire movement. I know so many Afghans who were showing up to the protests and didn't know what they were protesting. Like, I had someone who thought that Hamas was one man, and when they would make comments about Hamas, they would be like, well, he does this, and I'm like, oh no, like don't stand next to me, like, that's hella embarrassing. Like, educate yourself on the topic. Don't jump on it because it's trendy. Don't do it because it's cool to look like you're down and, like, you're against colonialism, and because all these things are trending topics on Instagram and they're cool hashtags now. So Afghan youth need to be more educated on the topic and understand why this is important. So the next time someone calls you anti-Semitic, or the next time someone calls you a radical terrorist for doing this, you have knowledge to drop on them and let them know that this is wrong. And you know what? I can prove to you that I'm not just a radical terrorist because I also support the Armenian community and they're Christian, or I also support the Assyrian community and they're Christian. So no, I'm not just backing up Muslims. I'm also going to be a good social activist and do this for other communities as well. And you would be surprised. Like, I have so many Armenian friends that, like, when the earthquake happened in Kabul, they donated because they saw how down I was for Armenians. So it's a good thing, and you need to be, my kind of last message, my last thoughts is, be more educated about what's going on so that you have an open heart and are more sympathetic to other causes. That's going to make our community stronger too. So what service you do for others is going to come back to you. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. That's where I give the little shout out to Professor Ulumi, who has a summer class and is teaching all year. So if you're in SoCal, I feel like there's awesome professors like Ali John that we need to take advantage of. Like you said, Medina John, like to get educated and know your history, know your stuff. Halima, did you want to chime in?
I think Medina and everyone brings up a great point about education. And I think education is one of the key factors where there's a difference, at least on the surface, between activism for Palestine and activism for many other causes and issues that are happening in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Eastern Asia. And I think that stems off of, Palestine being something that's a little bit more, I wouldn't say easy, but, something that's understandable, and that there's a clear oppressor and there's a clear oppressed. When you get into politics of, like, say, Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan, things get a little bit messy. In Afghanistan's case, we know that there's, an issue with the Taliban, and we know that they're, the bad people that need to get out, but, the politics there gets a little bit messy. The same applies to Pakistan, the same applies to other places, and it's unfortunate, but that I feel like that is the case, and you can also see that a lot of times on MSA campuses, or MSA groups on college campuses, where a lot of focus is given to Palestine and given to causes where it's easily identifiable to know the oppressed and the oppressors. But once things get a little bit too heavy into politics and maybe people aren't as well informed, that type of activism isn't there as much. So I think education is definitely the biggest factor in getting people to be more aware about different causes, not having that selective activism where you're for a select group of people, whether they're a certain religion, a certain race of people from a specific country, and so on and so forth, but rather applying that across the board to just being socially active for the cause of humanity, for just being a humanitarian and seeking that justice for everybody, regardless of race, religion, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Layla?
Okay, I just wanted to share this T-shirt that I got, and it's actually designed by an Afghan designers, and it's basically, hopefully you can see this, it's a classic photo of Tupac Shakur, the rapper, and then rather than West Side, it says West Bank Till I Die, and it's from Afghan youth. I think the clothing brand is called Native Immigrant. So I thought that was really cool, and it's just like beautiful solidarity to just, change that up, make it relevant, make it, into the arts and fashion, and not be so, not be scared for their first designs to do something like that. I think that was really brave and beautiful. So if you guys want that shirt, it's from Native Immigrants, and I think it's from LA or somewhere in California. Yeah.
Ali?
Thanks. This has been a really fantastic discussion. The only thing I have to say is, and it may be controversial and it may be completely wrong, but rather than support a group based off of identity politics, I say support an ideal like justice. because so long as Palestine isn't free, Afghanistan isn't free, and what happens over there happens and affects us here. Palestine, Afghanistan, Ferguson, they're all connected. This is our world, and it's up to us to fight for it.
Thank you so much. I couldn't think of better words to conclude with. So thank you for joining in. And our discussion page is going to remain live. If you want to take what we've talked about here and continue the conversation, please join us on Facebook for that. Thank you to the panelists. Have a good evening.